In 1839, Maine and Britain called up thousands of troops to fight over trees, and no war was ever declared. No war was ever taught, and the reason why is stranger than the war itself. You've heard of the Civil War, the Revolution, maybe even the War of 1812, but nobody taught you about the winter two nations nearly went to war over a forest. It's called the Aroostook War, late 1838 into 1839. The border between Maine and British-controlled New Brunswick was never actually settled. Both sides claimed the same 12,000 square miles of timberland, not farmland, not gold, just trees and the money they were worth. Maine sent land agents to evict Canadian lumberjacks. New Brunswick sent its own militia back. Within weeks, thousands of armed men were marching into sub-zero forest with no formal war ever declared. Here's where it gets strange. Congress authorized $10 million, a staggering sum in 1839, and 50,000 troops, without declaring war, without a single major battle. Farmers and loggers, barely trained, were issued muskets and marched into snow so deep some units lost men to frostbite before they ever saw an enemy. They built forts overnight. Wooden stockades in the middle of nowhere, meant to hold a border nobody could even agree on. Log cabins burned. Supply lines froze. A land agent was taken prisoner. Reports came back of accidental deaths, soldiers who never fired a shot at the enemy, dying anyway from cold, from panic, from a war that technically didn't exist. And it kept escalating. British warships began moving toward North American ports. Nova Scotia's legislature approved emergency war funding of its own. General Winfield Scott, the same man who later commanded in the Mexican-American War, was dispatched personally to prevent full-scale combat between two nations that were supposedly at peace. Newspapers in Britain and the United States started using the phrase "on the brink." Diplomats on both sides privately admitted they were one skirmish away from a second war between former enemies, just 25 years after the last one ended in flames. But here's what doesn't add up. If this really nearly triggered a second Anglo-American war, why does almost nobody know its name? Wars that almost happen usually get remembered louder than the ones that do. Near misses make great stories. This one got buried instead, and the burying wasn't an accident. The truth is uncomfortable for both governments involved. This wasn't a war over liberty or territory in any noble sense. It was a war over timber profits, over who got to log a forest and sell the wood. Politicians on both sides had spent decades insisting the era of border wars was over, that reason and diplomacy had replaced musket diplomacy. Admitting they'd mobilized 50,000 men and nearly triggered a war over lumber contracts made every one of them look reckless, greedy, and small. So it got settled quietly. In 1842, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty resolved the border, not through justice, not through the will of the people who'd frozen in those forts, but through closed-door negotiations between a British diplomat and an American Secretary of State. And here's the part they really didn't want known. Both negotiators had access to an old, decisive map proving where the true boundary lay. Both sides suspected it favored the other's claim more than their own government wanted revealed. Rather than let that map become public, and let citizens see how close their governments came to sacrificing them for a private benefit, it was quietly shelved. Maine got less land than its own agents believed it was owed. The people who mobilized, who marched, who lost friends to the cold, they were never told the deal may have been shaped by a document their own leaders chose to bury. So think about what else that means. If a near war involving 50,000 troops and a secret map can vanish from the story of America, cut cleanly out of the textbooks between the War of 1812 and the Civil War, what does that say about the wars we do remember? The ones we're taught in detail, with heroes and villains clearly drawn. Maybe the difference isn't how important a conflict was. Maybe it's simply who benefited from you forgetting it, and how well they managed to keep it that way. Nobody has ever definitively confirmed what was actually written on that suppressed boundary map, or where the original copy ended up.